Class 97 on the Golden Doves. We're on page 51. Another beautiful spring morning. Shabbat Shemo. Wow, the trees are all green. At least the ones over there. This one is not green. It gets green later, but you begin to see some leaves. Beautiful blue skies, white puffy clouds, and good cold brew. Baruch atah Adonai. So we were dealing with the notion of repetition and change. So we said that we have a fixed text, and then in the course of transmission there's change. I want to explain something. When we say change, of course we don't mean change to the text, because the text is permanent, right? The text itself doesn't change, but the perception of the text and the way the text is interpreted, because we always have new derashot, right? So you always have new derashot in the text. Every reader and every generation, through the derashot, views the text a little differently than the previous generation. So it's not the text that changes, but rather it's the approach to the text and how the text is understood that changes. And even when I say how the text is understood, in Mikra Yosemi the Peshuto, so of course there's always going to be the Peshat layer of the text, but there's going to be new insights on the text. There's going to be new Chidushim on the text, and those insights are going to be unique to me, because I'm the only person who was born in that time, in that space, who experienced the things that I experienced. Nobody else had my specific experiences, my parents, my family, my upbringing, right? Everybody else had a different family, different parents, different upbringing, and therefore I can see things in the text perhaps that nobody else was able to see before me or after me, right? That's the idea of derasha. Let's continue now. Repetition. So we were talking about to repeat, right? Repetition directly concerns the concepts of creation. So it has to do with creation as well. We're going to see how in a moment. Transmission of the law, which we discussed, the idea of transmission of the law. And ritual. When the Torah tells you to perform a mitzvah, you're repeating something. For example, when we bring the Korban Pesach, we're somehow repeating the Korban Pesach that was brought by our fathers in Mitzrayim. But we do it a little differently. Right? The Torah says that the way you do the Korban Pesach Dorot is different than Pesach Mitzrayim. Right? So interesting. Let's study this. In a simultaneous system, repetition is impossible. Right? So when you have a system everything is simultaneous, metaphysics, as we said, where things just exist out there, there is no repetition because the perfect existence is out there, right? So there's nothing to repeat. Metaphysics is. It just exists. Right? The beautiful triangle, the perfect triangle exists out there somehow, right? The perfect chair, right? The ideal chair exists out there. Therefore excluding repetition. So there is no need to repeat because you already have the perfect chair. You already have the perfect ideal of justice, right? So why would you repeat it? Since absence and negation cannot be tolerated in the realm of the ontological, there can only be representation in a tautological sense. So now, in this type of thinking, right, in metaphysical thinking where things exist permanently, there is no empty space because the thing is always there, right? So the existence of things imposes itself upon us, and there is no room for absence, right? And we're saying that again. Since absence and negation cannot be tolerated in the realm of the ontological is the world out there, outside of me. So there's an objective world outside of me, and that objective world exists in a permanent sense. So all I can do is I can represent the world, right? I can't repeat it, right? So I can create a chair. This chair that I'm sitting on is imperfect. There's a perfect chair up there, and this chair somehow represents the perfect chair, right? Repetition and negation are functions exclusive to successive analysis, and therefore intrinsic to semiotics. On the other hand, in a successive synthesis system, where we try to synthesize information along the timeline, repetition is important because I repeat. And by repeating, I'm continuing forward from where the last, so I say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and then I say it again, and then I say it again, and then I say it tomorrow. And I always attain a new understanding of Hashem as my experiences continue. I attain a new understanding of that pasuk. So I'm repeating the pasuk, but I'm also learning, it's changing in the sense of advancing, in the sense of progress, right? So this type of repetition and negation. Now, when I repeat the pasuk, in a sense, I'm negating the understanding that I had yesterday, in so much as I'm now going to add on that understanding. So I'm saying that original understanding wasn't perfect. I'm negating it. Wait, stop. Let me think about it again. So there's a point where I stop, I negate. Wait, I want to think about it. I understand something a little more deeper about Achdut Hashem, right? So repetition and negation are functions exclusive to successive analysis. Obviously, for that to be possible, for me to stop, there can't be this metaphysical existence that imposes itself upon my mind, right? There has to be a point where there's emptiness, and then I'm thinking in the empty space, and then I reprocess the information and I understand it more deeply. And therefore intrinsic to semiotics. So semiotics means the science of signs. So if I want to understand a sign, a symbol, a metaphor, a pasuk, a word, the way the words are put together in the pasuk, so I need to stop and reformulate it, right? And I'm not burying and doing away with what I had yesterday, but I'm just reconsidering it to attain a new understanding. At the cosmological level, too, nature is conceived as the repetition of creation. So we have the natural world. So the tree grows. So every time the tree grows or the grass grows, it's a repetition of the original act of creation, where God made the grass grow and God made the trees grow. So every spring, when I look at the beautiful leaves coming out of the trees, it reminds me of God's creations. So every repetition, or rather the natural world acting as it does, is actually a repetition of creation. And that's why whenever the sun rises, we think of the original creation. So when I see the sun rising, I say Yoser Or. I don't mean to say that God just said that at this moment it was a moment of the original Bereshit, where there was nothingness, and then God created the light out of the nothingness. But rather I say this Or is a repetition of the original act of creation by God, right? And it is an act of creation itself, but it's not the same act of creation. It's a furtherance of the original act of creation. A brief consideration of the scriptural Sabbath will be helpful in understanding this concept. Let's think about the idea of Shabbat, and this is a wonderful chidush. This is just so great. So we put it, we always have this thing where we study these scientific, philosophical ideas, I guess, for lack of a better word, and then we bring it to the Torah. So now we're going to bring it to the Torah. Shabbat. Ben Amozek, Alav Hashalom Rabbi Eliyav Ben Amozek, one of the greatest Hachamim Sephardim from Livorno, Italy, was outstanding Talmid Chacham, examined the following problem. According to Scripture, rest on the seventh day celebrates creation. Why do we rest on the seventh day? Why do we observe Shabbat? To remind us, explicit. So we observe Shabbat to remember God's rest. To remember the creation. So we remember creation on the day that God stopped creating. The association of the Sabbath, the day when there was no creation, with creation is unsettling. So the question asked by Rabbi Eliyav ben Amozek about my father is, why would you remember the creation of the cosmos on the one day where there was no creation of the cosmos, right? From a metaphysical point of view, one would have expected creation to be celebrated either on the first day, when it began, which is exactly what the Christians do, right? That's when creation started. Or on the sixth day, when it was completed, right? Which is what the Muslims do. They celebrate Friday. Rather than on the seventh day when it was absent, right? But the Jews, we celebrate creation on the one day when there was no creation. The answer to this problem concerns the very concept of creation. Ben Amozeg noted that the essential and idiosyncratic, unusual, point of the biblical idea of creation is not merely that God creates. What makes Ma'aseh Bereshit so incredible, so unusual, so special is not just that God created, but rather that the God who creates can abstain from creating. The same God that has the ability to create yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, can stop. There's a silence. Interruption of creation signifies creation as pure volition. It's only because you can stop that God stops, rather. I'll give you an example. This phone. This phone is a machine. It has battery. It has a clock. And the clock is continuously running. This phone doesn't have the freedom to say, I want to stop running. I want to stop the mechanism. It always goes on and on and on because it has no free will, right? The point of God's creation is volition. It's precisely because God stopped creating that we understand that God is free. And therefore the original creation was an act of volition and freedom. It wasn't an act of necessity. This phone must by necessity do what it's doing. It has no other existence other than in the realm of nature. So it's always acting naturally according to the rules of nature. God is above that. God is volitional. Interruption of creation, again, signifies creation as pure volition. It also expresses the paradox that the supreme power is the power to limit. That is, to express in limited terms that which is infinite. So you have the infinite power of God. God's existence is infinite. And I just use the word infinite in a very gross way, in the sense that we cannot, we just say, we throw a word and we say, God is this. God is above that. God is above human language. So even the word infinite doesn't encompass somehow God. It's just a way for us to try to express something about God and say God is not limited. So we say God is infinite, right? So there's a paradox here. So you have the supreme power of God, the infinite power of God, and somehow he's going to limit his power in the universe and create a limited system, right? And this universe somehow is an expression of God's infinite power, but the universe itself is limited. So here we're now quoting Rabbi Eliyahu ben Amozeg, and I just want to see where Rabbi Eliyahu ben Amozeg says this. So give me a moment, please. I'm looking at the footnotes. Footnote number 8, and it is here. Em la Mikra, which is his Perush on the Chumash. Okay, volume 2. So that would be on the book of Shemot, right? And that's probably on Aseret HaDiberot, where the Rabbi Eliyahu ben Amozeg brings this Perush. A similar idea, I'm reading in the footnote now, a similar idea was expressed by Philo on the life of Moses, that the Shabbat celebrates the birthday of the world. This is what Philo said. In the sense that only absence of creation, you see the absence? There's a silence, right? Only absence of creation permits celebration of creation. So during the absence, now we have the opportunity to react to the creation. Do you see how this fits in with first, second person? God speaks. That's the first person. There's silence. And he says, now you reply to that silence. So now we become the first person. That's only possible not in a metaphysical world, because in a metaphysical world there is no interruption. The presence of these ontological objects or things is permanent and it's hierarchically superior to us, right? So there is no silence there. Let's read now the Bilah ben Amozeg. This is a translation into English of the Hebrew of the Bilah ben Amozeg. It seems to me that the seventh day was deliberately chosen in order to reject the opinion held by the heretics that God created the world out of necessity and compulsion. By the heretics here he refers to Aristotle and the Greek philosophers, because for them God is just part of nature. So God's creation of the world was an act of causality. There was cause and effect. So God is part of the system of causality for the Greek philosophers, and we reject that. There is no causality in God. Nothing compelled God to create. The interruption of creation is evidence that he created with his absolute will. The fact that God is able to stop and say, now I don't want to create. This phone can't stop itself. Right? It may run out of power, but that's just a reflection of the fact that it doesn't have infinite power. But so long as the power continues, the phone doesn't have the ability to stop. Right? Right. When he wished it. There is an additional reason that in regards to his infinite power, he would have had to continuously create infinite worlds, and there is some truth to this. Now, on the other hand, also, there's another part. Because God has infinite power, and is infinite, again, I'm using the word infinite in a gross sense, right? So one would say he must continue to create, and 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 the world should be infinite. That's precisely the point. He doesn't make the world infinite, because he's saying, my creation of the universe, says God, is a choice, and I can stop, and it doesn't need to be infinite. Nonetheless, interruption actually demonstrates his power more than continuous creative activity. So an unintelligent person would say, no, it would have been far more powerful like God created an infinite universe, right? No, but we know the universe has a particular size and particular dimension, and that's it. The universe is not infinite. We know that scientifically speaking. So wouldn't it have been greater if God created an infinite universe? No. The greatness is that he can create a finite universe. That's the power. His power more than continuous creative activity, interruption actually demonstrates his power more than continuous creative activity, since there is no greater power than to be able to put an end and a limit to an infinite power. Right? In truth, the infinite power is God's ability to limit himself in proper space and time. That's a far greater power. So that in this finite universe, somehow God can manifest himself or show himself to the creations within a finite universe. Furthermore, without God's ability to restrain his infinite power, it would have not been possible to create an intelligent animal with an autonomous spirit and individual personality. A third amazing thing about Shabbat. Why Shabbat is so essential, why the silence, why the pause is so essential. If God's presence was that metaphysical presence of the Greeks, right, and it was just there, right, there would be no possibility to create man b'Tselem Elohim. Man b'Tselem Elohim means man himself is autonomous and has Bechira Chofshit. He can choose to do good, he can choose to do bad. Man is free. If God's creation of the universe was infinite and the overwhelming metaphysical presence, there would be no room for another creature, God, namely that is like God, man, which itself is autonomous, because it would be no autonomy. For there to be Bechira Chofshit, for there to be man who has the ability to choose, God has to dissimulate himself. There has to be a silence. And now I have to choose what to do. If God is on top of me, you do this, I'm like, okay, I'll do it, right? But God is not on top of me. That's exactly the point. He hides his presence, dissimulates himself within this beautiful universe, which really is beautiful and amazing. And I enjoy the universe because if God's presence was here, I would be terrified, which is what happened in Har Sinai, right? So if I choose to do good, it's because I chose to do good. It's because I have autonomy. So again, Shabbat is essential for there to be freedom, for there to be autonomy. It's in the space, the blank space, the silence. The man now can project his own freedom and his own autonomy. Furthermore, with an individual personality, right? The universe would then have been purposeless. And then if there is no man in the universe, then what is the point of creation? Just to create a clock? Just to create a mechanistic system? That's not fun. Create this wild card called man and tell man you can do whatever you want. You can be the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst, Mashemo, Hitler, and other garbage like that. You can be that. Nobody's going to stop you. Or you can be the best of the best of the best of the best. Moshe Rabbeinu and all, Abraham, Isaac, Yaakov, right? That's the point of the universe. So there has to be this pause where God is silent. He hides himself and he wants to hear our reaction. The Sabbath was thus instituted to testify to that. That's the edut of the Shabbat, the real greatness of God. Right? Now it's my father writing. Similarly, the rabbis taught that God had declared, I am he who said to the world, stop, on the pasuk Shaddai, right? El Shaddai. So Shaddai she'amar le'olamo dai. That's power. You see the power of Hashem? It's not in the infinite. Of course, he is infinite. I mean, right? We know that. But it's beyond the infinite that he can make things finite. For if I had not said stop to the heavens and stop to the earth, they would have continued to expand until this very moment.